My name is Sienna. I am 32 years old and I am a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. After my millionaire grandfather died and left me everything, my parents, who had ignored me all my life, tried to sue me for the money. When I walked into the courtroom, my mom rolled her eyes, but the judge froze. "Wait, the charges are against you," he said. They never knew who I really was. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, and I walked in alone. The air inside was stale, smelling of old wood polish and anxiety, but my breathing remained steady. I adjusted the lapels of my black suit. It was a simple off-the-rack piece I had bought at a discount store 5 years ago, the fabric slightly worn at the elbows. Across the aisle, the contrast could not have been more blinding. My parents, Byron and Lucille, sat flanked by a team of high-priced attorneys. My mother was wearing a designer dress that cost more than my first car, and my father was adjusting a silk tie that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Next to them sat my younger brother Trey and his wife Becky. They were laughing. Actually laughing. I walked to the defendant's table and set down my battered briefcase. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor caused my mother to look over. She did not wave. She did not look concerned. She leaned over to my father, but her whisper was loud enough to carry across the quiet room, designed specifically to hurt. "Look at her," Lucille hissed, her eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised disgust. "She could not even afford a decent suit for court, and she thinks she deserves to keep Dad's $5 million. It is embarrassing to be seen with her." Becky, my sister-in-law, did not even look up from her phone. She was scrolling through social media, her acrylic nails tapping aggressively against the screen. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with boredom. "This will be over in an hour. Where should we go for lunch to celebrate? I heard that new seafood place downtown has a great VIP room. We should book it now, before the verdict is even read." I sat down and folded my hands on the table. They thought this was a game. They thought I was just Sienna, the quiet daughter who filed tax returns for minimum wage and drove a rusted Honda. They had no idea that the woman sitting across from them had spent the last decade taking down money launderers and corporate fraudsters who were 10 times smarter than they were. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. Judge Holloway walked in. He was a man known for his terrifying memory and zero tolerance for nonsense. He settled into his high leather chair and opened the case file. I saw his eyes scan the names on the docket. Byron and Lucille Vance versus Sienna Vance. He frowned. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the plaintiffs, my preening parents, and then he looked over at me. The silence in the room stretched thin. Judge Holloway's eyebrows shot up. He took off his glasses and leaned forward, staring directly at me. His voice was not stern, it was confused. "Ms. Sienna." I stood up respectfully. "Good morning, Your Honor." The judge looked from me to the file and back again. "Wait, the charges are against you," he asked, a note of genuine disbelief in his tone. "These people are suing you for elder abuse and fraud." My mother let out a dramatic huff, standing up before her lawyer could stop her. "Yes, Your Honor, and we demand justice. She manipulated my poor father." I met Judge Holloway's gaze. His eyes held a flicker of recognition. He knew me, not as the defendant, but as the lead investigator on a massive racketeering case that had passed through his court just 6 months ago. He knew I was the one who found the hidden offshore accounts when everyone else missed them. I kept my face impassive. "Yes, Your Honor," I said calmly. "They claim I manipulated my grandfather to steal their inheritance." The judge slowly put his glasses back on, a strange look passing over his face. It looked like pity, but not for me. He looked at my parents with the expression one might give to someone playing with a loaded gun. "Very well," he said slowly. "Let us proceed." My mother sat back down looking triumphant. She whispered to Trey, "See, the judge already hates her." But I knew better. The conflict in this room was just beginning, but the war had started 3 weeks ago, on the day we put my grandfather, Papa Joe, in the ground. That funeral was the moment I realized my family was beyond saving. The memory hit me hard as I sat there in court. It had been 90 degrees in the shade, the kind of humid heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin. I was kneeling by Papa Joe's grave, my knees pressed into the dirt, trying to say a final prayer for the only man who had ever loved me unconditionally. Behind me, I could hear them. My parents were not praying. They were networking. Lucille was holding her phone up, streaming the funeral on Facebook Live. I could hear her fake sobbing voice pitched perfectly for the camera. "Thank you all for the stars and the support," she was saying, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "It is so hard to lose the patriarch of our family. We are just devastated. Please keep sending those donations to the memorial fund link pinned in the comments." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Papa Joe hated social media. He was a man of quiet dignity who built his fortune laying brick and mortar, saving every penny, investing in land when no one else saw the value. And here was his daughter turning his final moments into a content farm. A few feet away, Trey and Becky were standing with a contractor they had invited to the funeral. They were pointing at Papa Joe's house, the beautiful Victorian estate that stood on the hill overlooking the cemetery. "We are going to gut the whole thing," Trey was saying, loud enough for me to hear. "Tear down those old walls, open up the floor plan. It smells like old people in there. We need something modern. A pool in the back, maybe a 6-car garage." Becky laughed, sipping from a water bottle. "Definitely. And we need to get rid of that ugly garden. Who has time to water roses? Concrete is so much cleaner." I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. My heart was pounding with a mixture of grief and rage. That garden was Papa Joe's pride. He had planted those roses with my grandmother 40 years ago. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we please not talk about demolishing his house while his casket is still above ground?" Becky turned to look at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple black dress and my scuffed heels. She smirked. "Oh, Sienna, you are always so dramatic. We are just being practical. Someone has to manage the assets. It is not like you can help." Lucille lowered her phone and chimed in, smiling that sickly sweet smile she reserved for me when people were watching. "Now, Sienna, do not be jealous. We know things are tight for you. How is that little data entry job going? Still driving that Honda from when was it, 2010? She said it loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. I saw a few cousins snicker. To them, I was the failure. The 32-year-old spinster living in a one-bedroom rental, driving a clunker, working some boring administrative job filing papers. They did not know that I drove a 2010 Honda because I understood depreciation and compound interest. They did not know that my boring job came with a federal badge and the power to freeze assets in 50 states. "I prefer to live within my means, Mom," I said quietly. Becky laughed, and as she turned, she accidentally on purpose tipped her water bottle. Ice-cold water splashed all over the front of my dress. "Oops," she said, not looking sorry at all. Her hand flew to her mouth in a mock gesture of shock. "My bad. But hey, that dress looks like it came from the clearance rack anyway. I am sure it will dry. When Trey gets the inheritance, maybe we will buy you a new one. Consider it charity." I stood there, water dripping down my front, watching my brother high-five his wife. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just looked at Papa Joe's casket and made a silent promise. They would not touch a single brick of his house. That promise led us directly to the lawyer's office a week later, the reading of the will. The scene was etched into my mind as clearly as the courtroom I was sitting in now. The conference room was mahogany and leather screaming of old money. My parents, Trey and Becky, took up one side of the long table, looking like they were ready to pose for a magazine cover. I sat alone on the other side. Mr. Henderson, Papa Joe's lawyer for 30 years, sat at the head of the table. He looked tired. He opened the thick leather binder and cleared his throat. My father, Byron, leaned back, crossing his legs. "Let's skip the preamble, Henderson. Just tell us who gets the house, and when the wire transfer hits my account, I have investors waiting." Mr. Henderson looked at my father over the rim of his spectacles. His expression was unreadable. "Joseph was very specific in his final wishes," he said. He adjusted the document and began to read. "To my daughter Lucille and her husband Byron, I leave the sum of $1 each. This is to ensure you cannot contest the will by claiming I forgot you." The room went dead silent. The smile froze on my mother's face. "Excuse me," she whispered. "To my grandson Trey." Mr. Henderson continued, his voice steady. "I leave my collection of vintage tools. Perhaps if you learn to use them, you will understand the value of a day's work." Trey's face turned a violent shade of red. "Tools." He left me hammers and screwdrivers, and finally, Mr. Henderson looked at me. To my granddaughter, Sienna, the only person in this family who ever asked me how I was doing, rather than what I could buy them, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the Victorian property, the investment portfolio, and cash reserves. Total value estimated at $5.2 million. The explosion was instantaneous. My mother shrieked a sound so piercing it made the secretary outside jump. "That is a lie. That is a forgery." My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling the water glasses. $5 million to her. She is a nobody. She barely speaks. Trey jumped up and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You witch! What did you do? You poisoned him against us. You made him sign that when he was sick, you took advantage of an old man with dementia." I remained seated, watching them unravel. I felt a strange sense of calm. This was exactly what Papa Joe had warned me about. "He did not have dementia, Trey," I said, my voice cutting through their screaming. "He had clarity. He saw exactly who you were. He knew about the gambling debts, Dad. He knew about the fake business loans, Trey. He knew everything." My father lunged forward, his face inches from mine. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat. You are going to sign that money over to us, or I will ruin you. I will drag you into court and paint you as a predator who preyed on a dying man. I will make sure the whole world thinks you are a monster. You will not see a dime." I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw nothing but greed behind his eyes. "Do it," I said. "Sue me. But remember, in court, everything comes out." And so here we were. The courtroom air was thick with tension as Judge Holloway put his glasses back on. The memory of the funeral and the will reading faded, replaced by the sharp reality of the present. My mother was smoothing her expensive dress, looking confident that her lies would win the day. Judge Holloway looked at the plaintiff's lawyer. "You may make your opening statement, counselor." My parents' lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. He had the slick, polished look of a man who charged $600 an hour to bully people. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, gesturing dramatically toward me. "We are here today to right a terrible wrong. We are here to expose a daughter who bit the hand that fed her, a woman who used her grandfather's vulnerability to steal the legacy that rightfully belongs to her brother and parents. We will prove that Sienna Vance is a manipulator of the highest order." I sat there stone-faced. Let them talk. Let them tell their stories. They thought they were fighting a lonely, broke tax preparer. They did not know they were standing in a courtroom with a woman who knew exactly where every single dollar in their bank accounts came from, and more importantly, where it had illegally disappeared to. The judge looked at me again, a question in his eyes. I gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. I was ready. 2 days after the first court appearance, the war moved from the legal system to my personal life. I was sitting in a high-level briefing at the IRS regional headquarters. The room was soundproof, filled with serious men and women in dark suits, discussing a multi-state money laundering ring. I was at the head of the table leading the strategy session when the security line on the desk phone blinked red. I picked it up. "Ma'am," the guard said, his voice tense. "We have a situation in the lobby. 2 women claiming to be your mother and sister-in-law are making a scene. They are refusing to leave until you come down." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I looked at my team. "Take a 15-minute recess," I said calmly. "I need to handle a personal matter." As I walked to the elevator, I took off my security badge and hid it in my pocket. I rolled my shoulders forward, shrinking myself down. I had to get back into character. To my family, I was not a senior investigator. I was just Sienna, the data entry clerk, terrified of her boss. When the elevator doors opened, the noise hit me instantly. My mother, Lucille, was screaming at the front desk officer. "I want to speak to her manager." "Do you know who I am? I am the mother of the woman who stole our inheritance." Becky was right beside her, pacing back and forth in high heels, filming the lobby with her phone. "Hey guys," she was saying to her followers, "we are here at my evil sister-in-law's job to confront her. She is hiding in there with our money." "Mom, stop." I rushed forward, keeping my voice shaky and low. "Please, you are going to get me fired." Lucille spun around, her face twisted in a sneer. "Good, you deserve to be fired. Come out here so everyone can see the thief who steals from her own parents to fund her secret life with some boyfriend." The lobby was full of people. My colleagues were passing by, some slowing down to watch. I saw the head of security reach for his radio, ready to have them forcibly removed. I gave him a tiny, imperceptible shake of my head. I needed them to think they had the power. "I do not have a boyfriend, Mom," I pleaded, looking at the floor. "And I did not steal anything. Please go home." Becky laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Oh, stop the act, Sienna. We know you are broke. Look at this place. It is depressing. You are working this dead-end job for peanuts while sitting on $5 million. Just give it back to Trey. He needs capital for his new restaurant chain. He is a businessman, not a paper pusher like you." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Trey had never run a successful business in his life. His last venture was a drop shipping company that lost $40,000 in 3 months. But I kept my head down. "I cannot give you what is not mine to give," I whispered. "It belongs to the estate." Lucille stepped close to me, poking a manicured finger into my shoulder. "You have 1 week, Sienna. If you do not sign those papers, we will make sure you do not have a job to come back to. We will picket this building every single day." They stormed out, leaving me standing in the silence of the lobby. I waited until the revolving doors stopped spinning before I straightened my spine. The terrified data clerk vanished. I nodded to the security guard. "I apologize for the disturbance, officer. It will not happen again." I drove home that evening exhausted, hoping for a quiet night. But as I turned the corner to my apartment complex, my headlights caught something bright red on my front door. My heart stopped. Someone had spray-painted the word "thief" across the wood in jagged, dripping letters. I parked the car and walked up the steps, stepping over trash that had been dumped on my welcome mat. My phone began to buzz in my pocket. It was my aunt, then a cousin, then the pastor from the church my parents attended. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened to the messages as I unlocked my ruined door. "Sienna, this is Pastor Jenkins," the voice said, smooth and judgmental. "Your mother called me in tears. The Bible says honor your father and mother. Whatever dispute you have, return the money. Do not bring shame upon your soul for worldly greed." I walked into my dark apartment and locked the deadbolt. I did not cry. I did not scream. I went straight to my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. I plugged in my secure key and logged into the federal database. They wanted to talk about greed, fine. Let us look at the greed. I typed in my father's social security number, then my mother's, then Trey's. I had avoided doing this for years because I wanted to respect their privacy, but the spray paint on my door had erased that boundary. The results populated the screen and my eyes widened. My parents were not just living beyond their means, they were drowning. 3 mortgages on their house, maxed out credit cards totaling over $200,000. And then I pulled up Trey's file. My golden child brother. I saw a series of large deposits into Trey's accounts from a company called Horizon Ventures. The name sounded familiar. I opened a cross-reference window. Horizon Ventures was a shell company currently under investigation by my department for a massive pyramid scheme targeting elderly retirees. Trey was not just a failed businessman, he was a recruiter for a scam. My fingers flew across the keyboard. If I dug deeper, I could see the flow of money. My parents were borrowing money they did not have to prop up Trey's illegal activities, hoping for a payout that would never come. They needed Papa Joe's $5 million, not to build a legacy, but to keep themselves out of bankruptcy and prison. I leaned back in my chair, the light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. "You want to use the law against me, Mom and Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk about shame? Okay, let's play." 2 nights later, the tone shifted. My father called me, his voice surprisingly calm. He invited me to dinner at the family home. He said he wanted a truce. He said they had overreacted and wanted to talk like civilized adults. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I needed one final piece of evidence to nail the coffin shut. I arrived at the house I grew up in. It looked perfect from the outside, but I now knew the mortgage was months behind. Inside, the table was set with the good china, roast beef wine candles. It was a performance. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes they made small talk. Trey poured me wine. Becky complimented my hair. It was sickening. Then my father cleared his throat. "Sienna, he said, folding his hands. "We have a proposition. We know you care about the family. We do not want a fight. So here is the deal. You sign the inheritance over to me for proper management. In exchange, we will give you a generous allowance. $50,000. You can pay off your little car. Maybe take a vacation." I looked at him. $50,000 out of $5 million. It was an insult, but it was also a test, and if I refuse, I asked, cutting into my meat. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My mother stopped eating. Trey smirked. My father leaned forward, the mask of the loving patriarch slipping off completely. "If you refuse, Sienna, things get ugly. We have a witness, a nurse who is willing to testify that she saw you switching your grandfather's heart medication the week before he died." I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "You are going to accuse me of murder?" "Not murder," my father said casually, taking a sip of wine. "Just negligence. Negligence leading to wrongful death. Unless, of course, you sign the papers." Then the nurse disappears. I looked around the table. My mother was studying her fingernails. Trey and Becky were watching me with predatory grins. They were actually going to do it. They would frame me for killing the man I loved more than anyone in the world just to get his money. I lowered my hand under the table, my fist clenching tight. I needed him to say it clearly. I needed it on the record. "So just to be clear, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you are admitting that you will pay a witness to lie and say I killed Papa Joe unless I give you the money." My father laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Money is king, daughter. You have no money, so you have no power. Without us, you are nothing. Yes, I will do whatever it takes to get what is mine. Now sign the paper." I stared at him for a long moment, memorizing the cruelty in his eyes. Then I stood up. "No," I said. My father's face turned purple. "Sit down. You think you can walk out of here?" "I am walking out," I said, grabbing my purse. "And Dad, you should have checked who you were talking to." I turned and walked out the front door, ignoring their shouting. As I reached my car, I reached into the breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out a sleek black pen, a tactical recording device standard issue for field agents. The tiny green light on the side was blinking steadily. I had every word. I had the blackmail. I had the confession. I got into my car and started the engine. They thought the court case was about the will. They had no idea that I was about to turn their civil lawsuit into a criminal investigation. The courtroom doors closed, sealing us inside with the stale air of judgment. We were back where we started, but the stakes had shifted violently. My parents' lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my car, stood up to deliver his opening arguments. He walked back and forth in front of the jury box, his voice rising and falling with practiced theatricality. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," he began, pointing a manicured finger at me, "we are here to expose a tragedy of a granddaughter who, consumed by jealousy and greed, took advantage of a dying man's confusion. We will prove that Sienna Vance isolated her grandfather, Joseph Vance, from his loving family in his final days. We will prove she manipulated his fragile mind to rewrite a will that had stood for 20 years. I sat at the defense table, my face a mask of calm. Inside, however, I was cataloging every lie. Next to me, my lawyer David, a former colleague from the fraud division who was doing this as a favor, leaned in. "He is good," David whispered, "but he has no idea what is in that box under your chair." I glanced down at the heavy banker's box at my feet. "Not yet," I whispered back. "Let them dig the hole deeper." My mother Lucille was called to the stand first. She walked up to the witness box, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She looked frail, a stark contrast to the woman who had screamed at me in my office lobby just days before. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling asked gently, "can you tell the court about Sienna's relationship with her grandfather?" Lucille sniffed loudly into the microphone. It was strained. Sienna was always jealous of her brother Trey. Papa Joe loved Trey so much. He always said Trey was the future of the family. But Sienna, she would come over when we were not there. She would tell him lies about us. She told him we did not love him. She poisoned his mind. She looked directly at me, her eyes hard and cold, while her mouth trembled with fake sorrow. Toward the end, she banned me from visiting. I just wanted to say goodbye to my daddy. But she would not let me in the house. She said he did not want to see me. I know that was a lie. My daddy loved me. A murmur went through the courtroom. I saw the jury looking at me with suspicion. To them, I was the cold-hearted gatekeeper. They did not know that Papa Joe had begged me with tears in his eyes to keep Lucille away because she only came over to ask where he hid his checkbook. I did not react. I simply wrote in my notebook, "Lie number 1, denial of visitation." I checked the timestamp on my evidence log. I had audio recordings of Papa Joe telling the nurse to lock the door if Lucille appeared. Judge Holloway watched me from the bench. He saw me writing. He saw that I was not panicking. His eyes narrowed slightly, a glimmer of anticipation behind his spectacles. He knew the hunter was just waiting for the right moment to snap the trap. Mr. Sterling smiled, thinking he had scored a major point. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. No further questions." As my mother stepped down, she passed by my table. For a split second, the grieving mask slipped. She smirked at me, a tiny triumphant twitch of her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the performance was enough. The bailiff called the next witness, Rebecca Vance. Becky stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked to the stand with a bounce in her step, looking every bit the innocent, concerned granddaughter-in-law. She swore on the Bible, her hand resting lightly on the cover, and sat down. Mr. Sterling approached her. "Becky, you spent a lot of time at Joseph's house in the final weeks, didn't you?" "Oh, yes," Becky said, her voice high and sweet. "I tried to help whenever I could. I loved Pop Joe." "And did you witness anything unusual regarding the defendant?" Sienna. Becky took a deep breath. She looked at the jury, then at the judge, and finally at me. Her expression shifted into one of fear. "Yes," she said. "It was about a week before he died, the day he signed the new will. I came over to bring some soup." Sienna was in the kitchen. She was making tea for him. I saw her take a small packet out of her purse. It was filled with white powder. She poured it into his tea and stirred it in. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a second. Mr. Sterling paused for effect. "And what happened after he drank the tea?" Becky lowered her voice to a whisper. "He got really groggy. He was slurring his words. He did not know where he was. And that is when she put the papers in front of him. He just signed them. He did not even read them. He was drugged." "Objection." David shot up from his seat, his voice booming. "This is pure speculation and a serious accusation of a felony crime without a shred of evidence." "Overruled," Judge Holloway said, but his voice was tight. He looked at Becky intently. "The witness may answer what she observed." Becky looked emboldened. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "She drugged him. That is the only reason he would cut his own son out of the will. She is a monster." My parents and Trey were nodding vigorously in the front row. Trey whispered loudly, "I told you." "She killed him." David remained standing. He looked at Becky with a razor-sharp glare. "Ms. Vance, do you realize that perjury in a capital case is a felony punishable by prison time? Are you absolutely certain you want to state on the record that you witnessed a poisoning?" Becky lifted her chin, defiant. "I am under oath. I am telling the truth. She is a murderer." My family looked ecstatic. They had played their ace card, a witness to a crime that never happened. They thought that because I was just a tax preparer, I would fold. They thought I would beg for a settlement to avoid a murder investigation. I closed my notebook. The tip of my pen clicked as I retracted it. It was the only sound I made. I looked at David and gave him a small nod. He sat down. It was time. I stood up slowly. I did not look at the jury. I did not look at my family. I looked straight at Judge Holloway. "Your Honor," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "At this time, I would like to dismiss my counsel and represent myself for the remainder of these proceedings." The room went silent. My mother laughed a short, nervous sound. "She thinks she is a lawyer now," she whispered to Trey. Judge Holloway looked at me over his glasses. "Ms. Sienna, are you sure you are facing serious accusations?" "I am sure, Your Honor. And before I cross-examine the witness, I would like to submit new evidence to the court. Evidence that speaks directly to the plaintiff's motive and the credibility of the witness." I bent down and picked up the heavy box. I walked to the front of the room and dropped it onto the evidence table with a loud thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Sterling jumped up. "Objection. We have not seen this evidence. This is a trial by ambush. It is rebuttal evidence, Your Honor," I said calmly, unzipping the box. directly addressing the lies told on this stand regarding my grandfather's mental state and financial decisions. I will allow it, Judge Holloway said, leaning forward. Proceed, Ms. Sienna. I pulled out a laptop and connected it to the courtroom's projector system. A giant screen descended behind the witness stand, right above Becky's terrified head. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, turning to the jury, my family claims I stole $5 million. They claim my grandfather was confused. They claim I drugged him. But the truth is much simpler. My grandfather cut them out of his will because he found out they were already stealing from him. I pressed a key. The screen lit up with a spreadsheet. It was a forensic accounting of Papa Joe's retirement accounts, rows and rows of numbers highlighted in angry red. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is a summary of unauthorized withdrawals from Joseph Vance's accounts over the last 2 years, totaling $210,000. I zoomed in on the transactions. Mr. Sterling shouted, "Objection! Relevance overruled!" Judge Holloway slammed his gavel down, his eyes glued to the screen. "Sit down, counselor." I continued, my voice cold and precise. These withdrawals were labeled as in-home care fees and medical expenses in the checkbook ledger kept by my mother. However, when we traced the routing numbers, the money did not go to doctors or nurses. I clicked the next slide. A split screen appeared. On the left, a check for $5,000 labeled physical therapy. On the right, the bank record showing where the check was actually cashed. The Golden Horseshoe Casino, I read aloud. And here is another one for $3,000, cashed at Louis Vuitton. And another, a deposit into a jagged account owned by one Rebecca Vance. I turned to look at Becky. She was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Ms. Vance," I said, stepping closer to her, "you just testified that you were at the house to help Pop Joe. Was that help before or after you used his debit card to buy that designer handbag you are hiding under your chair right now?" Becky pulled her bag close to her chest, her eyes darting to my parents for help, but they were frozen. My mother's hand was covering her mouth. My father was staring at the screen, sweat beading on his forehead. "I am not done," I said, turning back to the judge. "This is not just theft, Your Honor. This is elder financial abuse, and I have the video footage of them bragging about it." I hovered my finger over the play button. The courtroom was dead silent. The air crackled with the electricity of a storm that had finally broken. My family looked at me, and for the first time, they did not see the quiet girl who filed taxes. They saw the executioner. Liars. Trey screamed, leaping from his chair. His face was twisted into a mask of pure panic. "That is a lie. That is a deep fake. She used AI to make that." I did not flinch. I did not even look at him. My eyes remained locked on the jury as I pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The spreadsheet on the screen vanished, replaced by a video file. "Let us see if the jury thinks this is a deep fake," I said calmly. "This footage is from the hidden camera I installed inside Papa Joe's study 1 year ago after he complained that cash was going missing from his safe." The video began to play. It was in black and white night vision, but the faces were unmistakable. It showed Trey and Becky creeping into the room. Papa Joe was asleep in his armchair in the corner, his breathing labored. On the screen, Trey walked over to the wall safe. He held a piece of paper. "I told you Mom knew the combination," Trey whispered in the video, his voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. Becky was standing over Papa Joe, looking down at him with disgust. "God, look at him," she sneered. "He is just dead weight. Why does he not just die already so we can get the money? We could have booked that trip to Cabo if he had kicked the bucket last week." The audio was crisp. Every cruel syllable hung in the air like a toxic cloud. In the video, Trey opened the safe and began shoving stacks of cash into his pockets. "Just grab the jewelry too," he hissed. "He will not notice. He is too senile to remember what he owns." I paused the video on a freeze frame of Trey stuffing his grandfather's gold watch into his pocket. The courtroom erupted. Jurors gasped, hands flying to their mouths. A woman in the back row began to cry. Becky let out a strangled sob and collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. My mother, Lucille, looked as if she had been slapped. Her skin had turned a sickly shade of gray. She stared at the screen at the undeniable proof of her golden child's monstrous nature. I turned to Trey. He was still standing, but he was trembling now. Is that AI Trey? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. Or is that you wishing death on the man who paid for your college tuition? Trey opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He sank back into his seat, defeated. But my father Byron was not done. He was a man who had never lost an argument in his life, and he was not about to start now. He stood up, his face purple with rage, ignoring his lawyer who was frantically trying to pull him down. "So what?" Byron shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "So what if they took a little advance? It was going to be theirs anyway. This proves nothing about the will." "Mr. Vance, sit down," Judge Holloway boomed. "No," Byron yelled back. "I will not let this secretary steal my family's legacy. Look at her. She is a nobody. She files tax returns for minimum wage. She drives a rusted Honda. She does not know how to manage $5 million. She will lose it all in a month. She is incompetent." The courtroom went deadly silent. My father's insults echoed off the walls. I stood there feeling the weight of his contempt. For 32 years, that voice had made me feel small. It had made me feel worthless. But today, it just sounded like desperation. Judge Holloway slowly leaned forward. The anger in his face was replaced by a look of cold, hard authority. "Mr. Byron Vance," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you have spent this entire trial insulting the defendant. You have called her incompetent. You have called her a nobody. But tell me, do you actually know who your daughter is?" Byron blinked, confused by the question. "Of course I know. She is a data entry clerk." The judge shook his head slowly. He took off his glasses and looked at me with a nod of immense respect. "Agent Vance," the judge said, "would you like to introduce yourself to your parents properly, or should I read your credentials into the record?" My family froze. The word hung in the air. "Agent," I stepped out from behind the defense table. I stood tall, smoothing the lapel of my cheap suit. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at Trey. "I am not a data entry clerk, Dad," I said, my voice steady and authoritative. "I am a senior special investigator for the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division." My mother's mouth fell open. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. What Trey whispered, That is impossible." I continued, my eyes locking onto Trey. "The reason I drive a 2010 Honda is not because I am broke. It is because I am a federal agent who knows that flashing wealth attracts attention. And the reason I am never home for holidays is because I spend my time hunting down complex financial crimes." I walked closer to the plaintiff's table. "And speaking of crimes, Trey, let us talk about your business. Horizon Ventures." Trey's eyes widened in terror. "You told Mom and Dad it was a crypto startup, didn't you?" I said. "You told them you needed investors. But for the last 6 months, I have been the lead investigator on a task force tracking Horizon Ventures. It is not a startup. It is a Ponzi scheme designed to launder money for offshore gambling rings." I turned to the jury. "My brother did not just steal from our grandfather. He has stolen over $4 million from retirees across the state. And my parents, they knowingly funneled Papa Joe's stolen retirement money into that scheme, hoping to get rich quick." Byron collapsed into his chair. It was over. The lie was dead. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Agent Vance, do you want to wait until the civil verdict is read, or would you like to execute the warrants now?" "Now, Your Honor," I said. At that moment, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The room filled with the heavy sound of boots hitting the floor. 4 U.S. Marshals and 2 IRS field agents marched in their badges, gleaming under the lights. The atmosphere shifted instantly from a civil dispute to a crime scene. Trey Vance, a marshal, shouted, his voice commanding, "Stand up and put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." Trey began to sob, a pathetic, high-pitched sound. "No, please, Mom, Dad, help me." But Mom and Dad could not help him. 2 other officers were already behind them. Byron and Lucille Vance, the second officer, said, "You are being detained for questioning regarding elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and theft of estate assets." The click of handcuffs echoed through the room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. My father, the man who always cared about his image, was being marched out in front of a gallery full of people. Trey was wailing as he was dragged away. "Sienna." My mother's scream pierced through the chaos. She was fighting against the officer holding her arm, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. "Sienna, please," she begged, reaching out to me with desperate hands. "I am your mother. I gave birth to you. You cannot let them take us. He is your brother. Fix this. You have the power. Fix this." The room went quiet again, watching the final confrontation. I looked at the woman who had left me out in the cold for my entire life. I looked at the woman who had mocked my clothes, ignored my achievements, and tried to frame me for murder just to buy a vacation home. I walked up to her. I stood just inches away, looking into her terrified eyes. "You are right, Mom," I said softly. "Actions have consequences. That is what you always told me when I was a kid." "Right? Sienna, please," she sobbed. "We are family." I adjusted my collar, my expression cold and final. "Real family protects you, Mom. Real family does not steal your future. Real family does not try to send their daughter to prison for a crime she did not commit." I signaled to the officer to take her away. "I cannot save you," I said, turning my back on her. "And frankly, even if I could, I wouldn't. This is the lesson Papa Joe wanted you to learn. You are on your own." I walked back to my table and began packing my briefcase. I did not look back as the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the beautiful, peaceful sound of justice. This story teaches us that shared DNA is not a license for abuse. Sienna proves that true power isn't about being loud, it's about being prepared. We often feel guilty for setting boundaries with toxic relatives, but real family protects your legacy. They don't plot to steal it. Never apologize for refusing to be a victim, even if the predator shares your last name. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own greed. If you were in Sienna's shoes, would you have sent your own mother to prison or shown mercy? Let me know in the comments.